We are counting down the 15 key reasons Black women in the 1960s moved through their cycles with a balance that seems almost unheard of today. From ancestral kitchen wisdom and garden fresh meals to daily routines shaped by necessity and community care, these factors reveal a world hidden from modern eyes. What everyday habits and cultural practices made the difference, and why have so many been lost? Let us discover what has changed, starting with number 15. Collard greens simmering on the stovetop, okay, okra sliced fresh from the garden, yams roasting in the oven. These were the everyday sights and scents in Black kitchens during the 1960s. Meals centered on whole vegetables, beans, and roots, cooked from scratch and seasoned with whatever was on hand. Processable foods were rare, not by choice, but because segregation and tight budgets kept most Black families away from supermarket aisles filled with canned goods and packaged sweets. Instead, cooks relied on what they could grow or buy fresh from local markets. Pot liquor, the vitamin-rich broth left after simmering greens, was sipped with cornbread for extra nourishment. These home-cooked meals deliver fiber, iron, and vitamins A and C in every bite, supporting bodies through every cycle. With little refined sugar and almost no ultra-processed snacks, the kitchen became a foundation for balance. But to keep these meals on the table, something else was needed: fresh produce often grown just steps from the back door. Backyards in Black neighborhoods often doubled as small farms, packed with collard greens, okra, sweet potatoes, and sometimes even a row of aloe or medicinal herbs. These gardens weren't just for show. They supplied as much as 70% of a family's vegetables in some rural homes. The skills behind them ran deep, passed down from generations who worked the land as sharecroppers or tenant farmers. Even in cities, families claimed patches of earth beside porches or on vacant lots, turning them into productive plots. Growing food at home meant more than saving money. It meant knowing exactly what was on the table and having a steady supply of vitamins and minerals no store could guarantee. When harvests were good, baskets overflowed and kitchens buzzed with the work of washing, chopping, and preparing for the months ahead. The steady flow of fresh produce made it possible to eat well all year, laying the groundwork for preserving and storing food for leaner times. Jars lined pantry shelves filled with okra pickles, sour greens, and even pig's feet soaking in vinegar. In Black households of the 1960s, preserving food wasn't just about survival. It brought a hidden benefit for women's health. Pickling and fermenting, passed down from sharecropping days, transformed garden surplus into probiotic-rich sides served with nearly every meal. Collard greens soured in barrels, okra crisped in brine, and vinegar jars bubbled quietly in the background. These preserved foods did more than last through winter. They fed the gut's microbiome, a community of bacteria that scientists now believe helps process and eliminate excess estrogen. Every forkful of tangy greens or crunchy pickled okra delivered live cultures that may have supported hormone balance from the inside out. Without knowing the word estrobolome, families relied on tradition to keep bodies in sync, storing up not just food, but a kind of natural medicine for women's cycles. Plastic containers sat on a few shelves in Black homes during the 1960s. Instead, glass jars and metal tins held leftovers, and food was wrapped in wax paper or cloth. Most household cleaners were made from simple ingredients like vinegar and baking soda, not synthetic chemicals. The kitchens and pantries of that era were free from the flood of artificial fragrances, plasticizers, and chemical preservatives that fill modern cabinets. It was not until the late 1970s, after Congress passed the Toxic Substances Control Act in 1976, that a chemical boom brought new plastics and synthetic cleaners into everyday life. Before then, Black families had less contact with phthalates, BPA, and other hormone-disrupting compounds now linked to health issues. Packaged foods in plastic bottles were rare, and the air inside homes carried fewer industrial fumes. This low-exposure environment quietly protected hormone balance long before the dangers of xenoestrogens became a public concern. Aloe plants lined kitchen windowsills in many Black homes, their thick leaves ready for use at a moment's notice. When cramps or heavy cycles struck, someone always knew to slice a piece, scrape out the cool gel, and mix it into a simple tea or apply it directly as a soothing poultice. Raspberry leaf, gathered from backyard brambles or bought in small paper packets, brewed into a deep red tea that elders swore eased monthly discomfort. These weren't just old wives' tales. Oral histories describe grandmothers preparing herbal remedies for daughters and granddaughters, passing down recipes at church gatherings or over backyard fences. In some neighborhoods, a church sister's recipe for raspberry leaf tea or aloe tonic was as trusted as any doctor's advice. The knowledge lived in memory, not in bottles on a pharmacy shelf. These homemade solutions gave women a sense of control over their bodies, using what grew close to home to manage cycles in a way that felt personal and empowering. Clotheslines snapped with wet laundry, children fetched water by the bucket, and gardens needed weeding before the sun grew hot. In the 1960s, daily life for Black women meant constant motion. Walking to corner stores, hauling groceries, and scrubbing floors were not just chores, they were the rhythm of every day. Many women worked outside the home as housekeepers or in factories, logging hours on their feet, bending, lifting, and moving. At home, stirring heavy pots, chopping vegetables, and tending backyard chickens or gardens kept muscles engaged from morning to night. This steady, moderate activity did more than tire the body. It supported healthy blood sugar, boosted insulin sensitivity, and helped regulate cycles. Medical research now confirms what elders lived. Regular movement lowers visceral fat and keeps hormones in balance. Without gym memberships or step counters, these routines built strength and resilience, laying a foundation for metabolic health that carried through every stage of life. Babies nursed at the breast were a familiar sight in Black communities during the 1960s, especially in families where elders or midwives guided new mothers through the early weeks. Nursing often continued for months, sometimes over a year, with encouragement from grandmothers and aunties who remembered when formula was a luxury few could afford. Extended breastfeeding naturally delayed the return of monthly cycles, a process called lactational amenorrhea, and that gave women's bodies time to recover between pregnancies. This spacing acted like a built-in reset for hormones, lowering the risk of irregular cycles and helping metabolism settle after childbirth. Family and community support made it easier for mothers to keep nursing, even when daily life was demanding. While national trends show breastfeeding rates dropping in the late 1960s, oral histories and elder stories point to pockets where the tradition held strong, especially in rural areas. These patterns quietly shaped hormone health, one nursing session at a time. A front porch crowded with cousins, grandmothers, and neighbors was a familiar sight in Black communities during the 1960s. Nearly 1 in 4 Black families lived in multi-generational households where 3 or more generations shared chores, meals, and daily life under one roof. The constant presence of elders meant more than extra hands in the kitchen. It brought a steady current of emotional support. When worries pressed in from work or the world outside, women gathered in prayer circles, swapped stories, and leaned on each other for comfort. Shared childcare gave mothers a break, while laughter and song eased tension after long days. Modern science now confirms what these families practiced by instinct. Close social bonds help keep stress hormones like cortisol in check. Lowered cortisol supports steadier levels of progesterone and estrogen, the hormones at the heart of every monthly cycle. In these homes, togetherness wasn't just tradition, it was a buffer against the kind of chronic stress that can throw hormones off balance. And when it came time to eat, everyone gathered at the same table, sharing meals that nourish both body and spirit. cast iron skillets spitting with bacon grease, chicken fried golden in lard. These were the flavors and scents that shaped Black kitchens in the 1960s. Instead of reaching for bottles of vegetable oil or bags of white bread, cooks leaned on animal fat saved from breakfast and hearty, unrefined starches like cornmeal, rice, and sweet potatoes. Grocery shelves did not overflow with seed oils or ultra-processed snacks, so meals rarely included the high omega-6 fats that now crowd modern diets. Science now shows that this old way of cooking kept inflammation low, with a better balance between omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. Slow-burning starches from roots and grains meant blood sugar rose gently, sparing the body from the spikes and crashes that refined carbs can cause. By frying in lard or bacon drippings and baking with cornmeal, families unknowingly supported steadier hormones. Every meal was a lesson in balance, one that set the stage for how the body handled not just food, but everything else that came its way. Hair grease jars lined the bathroom shelves, thick glass filled with petroleum jelly or natural oils, not plastic bottles packed with modern additives. In the 1960s, Black women's daily routines relied on simple ingredients: coconut oil, lanolin, cocoa butter, and castor oil for hair and skin. Commercial products existed, but formulas were straightforward and free from the cocktail of synthetic parabens and phthalate-based fragrances that fill today's beauty aisles. Even the most popular pomades and pressing oils used fewer chemical preservatives, and packaging rarely leached hormone-like compounds into the contents. Oral histories recall mothers and daughters scooping hair grease from sturdy jars, massaging it into scalps and braids without a second thought about chemical exposure. Makeup was basic: pressed powder, maybe a touch of rouge or Vaseline for shine, applied sparingly, since many brands ignored Black skin tones. The absence of plasticizers and xenoestrogens in these products meant less risk of disrupting the body's delicate hormone balance through daily contact. Self-care routines were built on what was available and trusted, not on a wave of synthetic innovation. For many, beauty meant protection as much as presentation. Doctor's visits for monthly cramps or heavy bleeding were rare in Black communities during the 1960s. Most women handled their cycles at home, guided by family wisdom and quiet conversations at church. Prescriptions for pain or hormonal issues were uncommon, not just because of cost, but because many did not trust clinics that often dismissed their concerns. Oral histories recall women relying on home remedies and community advice, using teas and rest instead of pills. Medical records from the era show low rates of prescriptions for menstrual pain, and surgeries like hysterectomy were usually reserved for severe cases, not routine discomfort. Some women did suffer in silence, their pain overlooked or misdiagnosed due to racial bias in healthcare. But for many, managing cycles was a private matter, handled with autonomy and respect for the body's natural rhythm. This approach kept medical intervention at bay and placed the power of care back into women's own hands, woven into the fabric of daily life. Spring brought tender dandelion greens and wild onions, plucked from yards and fields before the summer heat set in. Summer meant baskets of tomatoes, okra, and pole beans, eaten fresh or simmered the same day they were picked. When fall arrived, families gathered to can peaches, pickle cucumbers, and store sweet potatoes in cool, dark corners. Winter plates leaned on what was preserved: jars of sour greens, dried beans, and whatever root vegetables lasted through the cold. Refrigerators, when present, held only what could not be kept any other way. Imported produce was rare, and choices at the store followed the seasons. This rhythm of eating matched the body's needs: vitamin C from spring greens after winter scarcity, less sugar and fruit in the colder months, and a natural break from constant snacking. Ethnographic meal calendars from the era show how cycles of harvest and scarcity shaped not just meals, but metabolism itself. Each season brought its own kind of nourishment: keeping hormones and energy in sync with the world outside. In June 1960, the Food and Drug Administration approved Enovid, the first birth control pill, launching a new era in women's health. But in Black communities, early adoption of these high-dose synthetic hormones was rare. The pill's rollout targeted mostly white insured women, with ads in glossy magazines and in doctors' offices that were out of reach for many Black families. Mistrust of the medical system ran deep, shaped by years of discrimination and by stories of forced sterilizations in Southern hospitals. Even when offered, the pill's side effects, nausea, headaches, and weight gain from doses many times higher than today's formulas made some women wary. For most of the 1960s, Black women relied on natural cycles and traditional family planning rather than pharmaceuticals. Uptake remained low until the 1970s, when Medicaid expansion and public health campaigns reached more neighborhoods. By then, the pill's formula had changed, but the earliest years left many untouched by synthetic hormone surges. This limited exposure helped preserve the body's natural rhythms, keeping monthly cycles in sync with the patterns set by food, movement, and community, not by a prescription. The timeline of pharmaceutical change ran alongside daily life, but for many, it was a distant current, not a flood. Cloth pads sewn by hand in church basements and at kitchen tables were a quiet constant for Black women managing their cycles in the 1960s. Mothers and daughters gathered scraps of flannel and soft cotton, tracing and cutting patterns passed down through families. Women's clubs and church sewing circles set aside afternoons to stitch stacks of pads, sometimes donating extras to girls whose families struggled to afford even the basics. These gatherings were not just about sewing, and they created space for private conversations where older women shared advice on caring for the body and handling monthly discomfort. Oral histories recall how these talks, often held behind closed doors or after Sunday service, gave girls the knowledge they needed without shame or secrecy. Clinic visits for menstrual issues stayed low, in part because so much guidance happened quietly at home or among trusted women. In this world, periods were treated as a natural part of life, managed with dignity and practical skill, far from the glare of medical offices or public scrutiny. The autonomy these practices offered helped women move through each month with confidence, relying on each other and the wisdom woven into every stitch. Recipes traded hands at church suppers, whispered between pews, or swapped across backyard fences carried more than just flavor. They held the keys to health passed down from elders who remembered a different way of living. In the 1960s, Black women did not rely on books or doctors for every answer. Wisdom traveled by word of mouth, from grandmothers who knew which teas soothed cramps to aunties who taught how to pickle greens for winter. Church kitchens doubled as classrooms, where women gathered not just to cook, but to share what worked, how a little raspberry leaf could ease a heavy month, or how aloe from a windowsill plant might calm a restless night. Free clinics run by groups like the Black Panthers opened their doors in neighborhoods that hospitals overlooked. These clinics did not just hand out medicine, they taught nutrition, reproductive health, and self-care, blending science with tradition. Women's clubs and sewing circles became safe spaces to talk about cycles, menopause, and the changes that came with age, long before these topics made it into medical pamphlets. An elder's voice lingers from those days. The peace in their souls showed on their faces. That peace came from knowing you were not alone. A network of sisters, mothers, and neighbors stood ready with advice, a hot meal, or a healing touch. This web of shared knowledge wove together every other habit: what went into the pot, how gardens were tended, even which products touched the skin. It was a living inheritance, always adapting, always growing stronger with each generation that added its own lessons. Today, as modern life pulls people apart, the memory of those networks is a reminder. Lasting health was never just about what was eaten or done, but about who stood beside you and the wisdom they were willing to share. Across all 15 entries, one pattern stands out. Health for Black women in the 1960s was shaped less by medical access and more by resourcefulness, tradition, and community support. Hormone balance wasn't a product of privilege. It was the result of necessity-driven habits and shared wisdom. That pattern reminds us that our environment and daily choices still hold powerful influence. The blueprint for wellness may be rooted closer to home than we think.